Hi, ask Dr. Melinda from Aging Gracefully and Strong IQ podcast from Attorney King Studios. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important topic of teaching and learning during this time of COVID. And I have two important guests, special guests, one on the other side of the country, Rafael Silva, who is a high school teacher at Flushing International High School in Queens, New York. And then we have someone local here in Coronado, Mia Bertelsen, who is also a high school teacher. So we're going to share their different perspectives on teaching during this very trying time. And I want to start with the population that you serve. Can you speak very briefly about what kind of students you have at Flushing International High School, Rafi?
Okay, so my school, Flushing International, is part of a network of international schools that specifically serve newcomer immigrants. So this means students that have arrived in the country anywhere between just having arrived a couple weeks prior to about 3 years in the country. And so everything that we do at the school is attuned to that fact that we are serving families and students that are in this really difficult transition of moving into a new country. So our curriculum is based on that. All of our curriculum is synergized with English language development. Our socio-emotional learning and our family outreach keeps this fact in mind. And being in New York City, and particularly in Queens, we have a super diverse student population. It's really a representation of all the micro communities that exist in Queens. We have students from Ecuador, from Mexico, El Salvador, China, Haiti. So it's really a representation of the colorful diversity that Queens and New York City offers. And it's really an exciting community to be a part of.
Mia, tell me about the student population that you teach in Coronado High School.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. I teach at Coronado High School. It's a beautiful island next to San Diego, and we have a great group of students. Primarily, we have a lot of military families in our community, but we have a mixture of other types of families as well. And we've all been banding together and using the resources that we have to deal with, these difficult times of COVID, because our students currently are not able to attend class in person. So we have just online learning. And, with that, it brings a whole new ballgame. It's been a challenge for teachers, parents, as well as students. It's pretty overwhelming.
So what do you think has been the greatest challenge, and how do you see that it could be better?
Well, I think the first hurdle we had to get over was, the teachers learning the technology as well as the students. And then once we kind of got our groove on and we learned how to Zoom and how to do things online, I really think the biggest challenge is how do teenagers who are social creatures by nature, how are they dealing with this? Because they have to go to class, they have to listen, they have to learn, but they don't have that peer interaction. And it's so artificial and so different and so not what their brains need. And it's really, really hard, but I am amazed at the spirit and the resilience of my students. They are rising to the challenge and they really are learning. It's amazing. I'm very happy at that part.
And how do you think how much involvement should parents have, in this process with the high school students?
Well, I really think that the high schooler at a certain point needs to do it themselves. Parents need to intervene when there's problems. But in the beginning, the parents, they help to set them up, make sure that their technology is working, that they know what time and where they need to be, find them a space to work in their home. But after that, the students are the ones that have to do it because this is their school, this is their homework, this is their learning and their work. And it is really, it's been a huge challenge. I've spoken to a few parents who say, I have 3 kids Zooming at the same time. I have a first grader who needs so much help. And I have a middle schooler and then I have a high schooler, and they kind of let the high schooler to go off on their own. But the problem is that a lot of high schoolers are dealing with a large amount of anxiety and stress due to these COVID times. And that's where as parents and teachers, we need to identify that's happening and jump in and help them.
How can we as parents help our kids that are having these anxiety issues? What do you think about that?
I think as a teacher, part of their anxiety comes because they're overwhelmed. They have too much work to do. It's hard. They have to teach themselves a lot of the time. The teacher is giving instruction, but a lot of times they need to figure it out. And that's where parents need to jump in and say, it's okay. If you don't get all those A's that I wanted you to have before, it's okay. As long as you're going forward, you're giving your best and you're learning, we're going to be happy with you. And I think that when parents kind of like can help them and let them know that, this is not a time of competition. This is a time of just getting to the end goal and being happy and balancing things. I know there are people who took their kids out of school for a little bit because their mental health needed it. And I know as a teacher, we're not supposed to promote that because, attendance is very important. But in my opinion, as a parent and a teacher, mental health is first. And if you see your child suffering mentally, you need to jump in and you need to help them to manage it and to break it down into pieces and take away some of the things that don't matter.
I think that's a very important point. I have a high school student at home right now, and she's just going crazy because she's a very social individual, and it's just hard for her to just be in front of the computer all day long. So I've asked her that if there were a couple of friends that she just wanted to work with at the house, maybe after school, doing some group work, and they could be outside, they could still be in a safe distance from each other, but just having that communication, I think it's important. They thrive on their friends, and so taking that away, it just seems like it's impeding their learning without having some way for them to communicate with their friends. What do you think about that?
I think it's really important to find ways, whether you can get with the socially distanced responsible way to get them together. They do Zoom calls together. They use social media. They're experts at it.
Right.
They know how to
about
stay
social media, that's for sure.
in touch. And I think in the end, what we really need to do is just make sure that our kids are okay. And if it's all right if you back off on things. My daughter, for example, she dropped one of her AP classes because it was just too much. And I'm okay with that because we need our kids to be happy. And a lot of people ask me, are they really learning? Because I don't think this works. Are they? The answer is yes. I see students learning. I teach a Spanish 1 class. It's primarily freshmen. So my students come in knowing little to no Spanish, and they are learning. Yes, we're a little bit behind of what it would normally be for the school year, but I am teaching it and they're learning and they're doing it. I'm so proud of them. I have so much hope for the future. I love my high school students. They're so smart, creative, wonderful. We're in good hands for the future. And even though this is really hard, they're doing it. And I'm so proud.
Well, I'm so glad that you're able to join us. I know that you're actually going to be teaching a class in a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
We have to Zoom.
I do.
So I'm so happy that you're able to join us today. And, it is very important to remember the mental health issues that are impacted by the students right now because of being isolated. And I encourage parents to please reach out to your kids and ask them how they're feeling. And do not accept fine as an answer.
I hear that a lot in my house.
Do not say, if they say fine, remember fine is a 4-letter word. They need to express themselves in a different way, because I don't believe a child when they say that they're fine anymore. I want them to interact more. So ask them, take their pulse, check how they're feeling. It's important that we address the mental health issues earlier so that if they need the help, they can get the help. That the Zoom calls, which are nice, so that there seems to be more access for mental health needs if you need that. So thanks for coming on today.
So glad to be here.
And Rafi, I want to ask you, what do you think are the structural challenges or the curricular challenges that you're seeing with the remote learning at Queens?
Sure, I can speak on that. So I guess before I get into the curriculum, I would want to do a quick review of the structural challenges that we're facing. it's my belief that our entire reopening process in New York City has been completely fraught with mismanagement and with students, teachers, and families not really being listened to by the DOE and by our union, the UFT. Since New York City is such a huge district, it's the biggest district in the country with the most students, a lot of the processes that happen in the district are very top down. And so there's really very little grassroots voices that get incorporated into those decisions. And so a lot of teachers and families were actually pushing against reopening at the beginning of the school year. We are currently in a blended learning plan. So that means that we spend half of our time at school with students teaching in the classroom, and then half of our time at home teaching remotely. And there were a lot of issues that were coming up when that plan was coming up and when we were planning it. And most of those issues really had to do with safety. And I know as a teacher that if students are concerned for their safety in a learning space, and if teachers are concerned for their safety, then the learning simply doesn't happen. You have to feel safe and welcome in a place before you can learn. And so some of these issues revolving around safety include things such as inadequate ventilation in school buildings. The fact that our buildings are extremely old, and as you can imagine, these are underfunded buildings that have not been updated in decades. And so they're really unsafe to have antiquated ventilation in the middle of a pandemic.
Are they checking students when they come in? How are they keeping kids safe when they actually go to school? Are they checking to see if they have COVID, or do they have to get tested? How's that work?
Got you. So there are some screening processes for when students come into the building. So for example, their temperature is checked before they enter the building. They have to complete a screening document with questions like, do you have any of these symptoms? Yes or no. Have you been in contact with anyone that has tested positive? Yes or no. All students and any staff members that are in the building have to wear PPE. So there definitely are some preventative safeguards when people are in the building. But there's also larger processes that are not really fully fleshed out. That is sort of like the higher tier of prevention when it comes to pandemics. One example of that being testing. We know that robust testing is able to identify where there could be possible outbreaks and where there are cases before people even enter the building. And unfortunately, the DOE does not have an obligatory requirement to test to be able to enter a building. Instead, it's strongly encouraged. And the current policy is that 10% of students and staff will be randomly selected on a periodic basis. I think it's every month or every couple weeks, I don't remember. And so 10% of people in the building are tested as a sort of a sample size. And to me, that's sort of inadequate when we're talking about a full-fledged pandemic, especially when in the country and in New York City, the numbers are on the rise again.
Do you think that there's an issue with having to close the school down again because of the increased rates of COVID that you guys are seeing?
So the current policy that the DOE has for school closure is if the citywide average of positive COVID test results is 3% or higher for 7 days straight, then the city will close all public schools. But we have also seen that there's an issue of certain communities where there are more COVID cases than others. One example is that there are many communities in Brooklyn that are experiencing huge surges in COVID cases, far above the 3% threshold that the DOE has placed. And so what the city has started to do is try to contain those areas and close schools in certain zip codes. But of course, we know that COVID doesn't obey zip codes. It's not going to stay in one place, right? People who go to school in another zip code, they'll take the subway or the bus to get there. New York City is a very dense urban area. And we know that COVID is not going to obey those boundaries that the city is drawing. And so I do see a larger issue that maybe we have not felt yet, but might feel in the future, where we suddenly realize that we have an outbreak that we could have contained if we had put more resources into robust remote learning. But instead, we tried to put together a faulty blended learning plan that ends up leading to another outbreak.
Do you think that the teachers are really concerned about their own safety? I know that parents might be concerned about the kids' safety, but how about your peers that you work with? How are they feeling about it?
Yeah, I can speak specifically to my peers at my school, and I know that a majority of them are worried about their safety. Something that we did while we were organizing ourselves and preparing for this process of reopening was we did something called a temperature check, where we just checked in and we did a quick survey online that was anonymous. How are you feeling about the reopening plan? Do you are definitely concerned for their health. We also had a person that experienced a positive COVID case in our staff even before students came into the building. That's how quickly and easily you can enter a school building. So I think people are concerned, but at the same time, we have to do our jobs. We do serve our students and our families, and we need to have curriculum ready, and we need to be in the school, and the DOE knows that. They know that we are being pulled on both sides, our personal safety as well as serving our students.
What do you think parents can do to help their kids navigate through this process of remote learning, or even help them? How can parents help?
Yeah, so I think I have a very specific perspective from one, not being a parent myself, and two, working at a school that serves a very specific population, which is newcomer immigrants. I often see with my families that a lot of the parents are also sort of in crisis mode, much like we're in a crisis of COVID. They are experiencing financial crisis and having to really support their families in an unprecedented time. And so if I were to speak to specifically the families that I serve, I would say take care of yourselves emotionally, and check in with your kids emotionally. I wouldn't even talk about the academic piece, because for a lot of our families, they're in a state of survival, being able to just make it past this, to be able to afford to live in a place. So that's kind of where I am at. If families have the capacity to, if they're able to be home when students are learning, or if they can even just check in, I would actually encourage them to reach out to teachers. I think teachers are really interested in building more relationships with families. Teachers have, especially in remote learning, have more flexible schedules. They're not always in a class with students. I mean, remote learning is very busy, just like blended learning. But I personally, in my schedule, have time set aside where I can talk with parents. And I think that parents should not feel like they're bothering teachers or feel scared to reach out. We would love to hear what concerns you have, any questions you might have regarding technology or learning, because teachers are learning just as much as the students are this year.
Do you even think that grades are that important right now? What do you think about that? Because I know that that's what parents worry about, but as a teacher, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, my philosophy on grades is that they matter in so much as they provide students with accurate information about how they are mastering our learning goals. So to be honest, whether it's remote or in-person learning, I would use grades as a metric for students to understand how they're doing, as a reflection tool. If you're referring to grades as a way to categorize students or to sort of rank them and give them a label or a sort of like a clerical item. I personally never liked using grades in that way, and I would say no, it would actually be unjust to use grades in that way, because so many students are facing technological barriers and learning barriers. So much of what I do online is really hard for kids to access, especially kids that are just learning English. It would be unfair to have the same expectations for them as a student who might be understanding what I'm saying.
It seems like that's going to be such a challenge in and of itself because they don't have maybe the mastery of the English language. And then you have to do differentiation learning with all of these kids during Zoom. So how can you even know if they understand what you're saying? And how can you just take the pulse of the class that way, especially if they don't show their face? I know that some teachers that I talked to said that the kids might have shown their face in the beginning of the sessions, and now as weeks go by, they just don't even show their face anymore. They just show that it's on.
Right. This is a very difficult challenge, particularly for my school, because the model of our school's curriculum really leans on the interactive piece.
Right.
It's very project and group project based. And the reason that our model is successful is because I teach 9th and 10th grade. And so the 10th graders are often the ones we lean on to be the bridge between English and native language. And so being in a remote environment and even being in person with all the students 6 feet apart and not really being able to work together is a huge obstacle to that. And so we have to be creative, and we're still learning how to find ways to check for understanding and to engage students in ways that are actually really independent. And that's completely backwards from how I've learned how to teach. So it's a really big struggle. One thing that I've been doing in my remote lessons is I've been using applications. There's different ones that teachers probably know about. They're called Pear Deck or Nearpod, applications that make slides, really teacher-centered activities, a little more student interactive. Mm-hmm. So while you're going through slides, the sort of average or a traditional presentation, PowerPoint presentation, an app like Nearpod or Pear Deck can put an interactive activity in the middle of the slide. It can put a multiple choice question. It can put a open-ended question. It can make a prompt where students have to draw something, where they have to match pictures with words. And on my end, while they're working in that activity, I can see their progress on that activity. So I'm actually able to check for understanding. I can see which students are being successful in the task and which students are struggling and might need to come to office hours later so I can meet with them individually. So it's one way to sort of go back to the students that are learning, but it's certainly not the same.
Right. It seems like it's going to be more work for the teachers, right? You have to really be in tune with your students. If you recognize, because you and Mia both talked about the mental health challenges that could be facing the students, if you recognize that there's a student that may need help, do you have the capacity? Does your school have the capacity to help them? That's what I'm worried about. If you recognize someone that has anxiety or depression, how are you going to be able to help them?
Thankfully, our school does have a strong counseling program. We have multiple counselors that are available to students, and these counselors are super proactive in building relationships with these students and having check-ins, and even being preventative and being able to sort of predict throughout the year what are some trauma-informed practices that we can use, and what are some manifestations of trauma that we can predict, particularly with the newcomer population, and how do we respond to that? So thankfully, our school is equipped to have that. I can't speak for all schools in New York City. I'm very sure there are schools that have not as strong a counseling program, or maybe might not even have one. We definitely know that there is a huge shortage of counselors, psychologists, social workers, mental health workers in public schools in general. At my school, thankfully, we have strong counselors to address that. Because, as a teacher, I'm not licensed or trained to do that. I can be a listening ear, but I certainly cannot, talk about those topics in a way where I feel fully able to do so.
Well, that makes me feel actually relieved that you have those resources available, because I really think that that's an important matter that we cannot, ignore. And I love that your school has resources available. And I just want to encourage all parents to talk to your kids, make sure that they need what they need in order to be in a thriving environment. And it might just mean having that encouragement emotionally. I really think it's important just to check in emotionally with the kids and just talk to them very frankly about how they're learning and what could be better. And I think just checking in more frequently is going to matter. And I just want the parents to remember to do that. Maybe making a point once or at least um, ask about how the school day was, or just at least just check in and ask them what challenges they might have had or what they liked about something. Maybe I usually ask my high schooler, well, what did you learn today specifically? Asking an open-ended question instead of asking, did you like school today? And I think just having that interaction, so it reminds the students of what they went over, and maybe if they can be reminded that if you need help, ask your teacher. And if you need help from a counselor, please encourage them to get the help that they need. Um, I know that you also have to go back to class and Zoom. So I really, really, really appreciate your time today. You gave some very important insight on how we can help our kids, and I love seeing that you're doing well at Flushing International High School, and I'm so happy that your kids are getting the help that they need. And thank you so much for your time today. This is Dr. Melinda Silva from Aging Gracefully and Strong on IQ Podcast at Attorney King Studios. Take care.